There's good news tonight about good deeds caught on those doorbell cameras and the moments of joy they inspire. When we think no one is watching,
we found your wallet.
Our truest selves are revealed.
We just thought we would give it back to you.
These kids in Colorado returning a wallet. This FedEx driver folding a customer's American flag correctly. FedEx worker Mel Marlette in Missouri caught on camera going above and beyond.
I grabbed the shovel and, like I've done countless times before, started shoveling and I cleared the stoop up.
Shoveling Jody Lafreniere's walkway.
I think we're so eager to catch that person doing something wrong. We hardly ever catch anybody doing something right.
There are, it turns out, so many people doing right, like sanitation worker Billy Shelby, who spotted 88-year-old Opal fall in her driveway.
And when she fell, of course, I jumped out the truck and ran over there, and I could tell she was in distress.
Since then, he's added a new duty to his route. Her daughter watches it unfold from her phone.
I see the sanitation worker walking my mom up arm in arm. They were just having some great conversation.
No one else had never done that, but he does, and he still does.
I just knew I was doing the right thing. You know, doing the right thing ain't hard to do.
Bye-bye. Then there is this video. 2-year-old Cohen running, arms outstretched toward pizza delivery man Ryan.
I thought it was so funny that my toddler just ran out and hugged a stranger.
His mother shared the video online. Ryan saw it and posted, "This little guy has no idea how much I actually needed that this week."
Upon going to his Facebook, that's when I saw the GoFundMe and that his daughter had recently passed, like within the last week. My heart absolutely breaks for the family. I can't imagine what they're going through.
A hug with an impact. So many little acts of kindness adding up and finally being seen.
I learned that there's still good people in this world.
You truly never know what people are going through, so always choose to be kind.
All right, welcome back, biggest little victory. This is Stephen, and I am here with Pastor Kendra. I thought she was going to say it. She didn't say it. And we have a special guest today. Some of you might remember him from before. It is Josh Blinson, all the way from Arizona, and he is going to be joining us in just a little bit. But first, Kendra, what kind of announcements can we look forward to?
Alrighty, everybody. Just like always, give us a like on Facebook at Victory Christian Fellowship. Follow us on Instagram and on YouTube at VCF Reno. Follow us on Twitter at BLV Podcasts. Zoom meetings. Join us every morning to start your day off with some awesome fellowship. 8 a.m. every weekday. Every Thursday at 6:30, Pastor Rhiannon is doing a Bible study. All of our Zoom meeting links will be posted on our Facebook, so that's the main thing. Make sure you go like us. Our live devotionals are being drawn back quite a bit as we transition back to normality. So keep an eye on Facebook to see when we go live. And if you have prayer requests, Pastor Liz is taking those and emailing them to the pastoral staff every morning. If you have prayer requests, Pastor Liz is taking those and emailing them to the pastoral staff every evening. She posts where she would like them sent on the Facebook. And also this Sunday, we are having our second drive-in service at Hobby Lobby on South Virginia Street. And it's at 10 a.m. You guys really need to be there. It was amazing, our first one on Sunday, but we'll talk about that later. And that's it.
All right. Yeah, it was a very, very windy Sunday. So for those of you who weren't there and you check out the video on YouTube, you will see we had to deconstruct tents and take down David's laptop because stuff was just flying around. So it was a good time, but it should be a lot less windy this week. So please join us. And it's a bigger parking lot, so we'll have more availability for people to come and see it. And you'll promise we'll be able to hear everything because it's all over radio, so you don't have to try and listen to some man shouting into the wind. But it is just, it's great to be able to see each other, even if it is from car windows. So the verse this week, we are going through 1 John chapter 4. And before we get into that, just that little clip I found online, and I thought it was so cool just to hear about the people that are demonstrating love, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is love. And there are just people around this country. We hear a lot of negative news, especially with the political partisan arguments, but it's great to hear that there are actually wonderful things happening in our country despite all of the negativity that's going on in the news cycle. So I think it's important that we get a healthy dose of both sides of reality. So if you'd like to follow on, please do so. Otherwise, just sit back and listen. And this will be 1 John chapter 4, going through verses 7 through 12, and then we'll just get right into the discussion. Dear friends, we should love each other because love comes from God. Everyone who loves has become God's child and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love to us. He sent his one and only Son into the world so that we could have life through him. This is what real love is. It is not our love for God. It is God's love for us. He sent his Son to die in our place to take away our sins. Dear friends, if God loved us that much, we also should love each other. No one has ever seen God, but if we love each other, God lives in us, and his love is made perfect in us. So first thing I want to ask you is, what was your biggest takeaway from the sermon?
Well, I'd have to say, after listening to everything, my biggest takeaway really was the just because when it comes to the love that God has for us. And Pastor David talking about that agape love and just how real that definition of just because really encompasses what that means. It's sacrificial. It's love without the love required back. It's just because. It was just great to hear that last night as I was listening to it. Biggest takeaway I had from it all.
I'd probably say something similar to that just it's not a love that's we base on what someone did for us or even that we can be paid back for it. It's just that awesomeness of just love anyway. Even if it's your enemy or the person you like the least, just do it anyway and be there for them. I think that is definitely my favorite part of it as well.
It's so hard to do that sometimes, though. Like, it's so hard to do that sometimes. Today, there were like 5 people on the road that just made me so angry. and the last thing I thought was to, just send love to them. Here you go. Sorry you're such a crappy driver. But so I that's definitely a huge takeaway for me as well, because that's something that I need to work on, is to try not to focus on the bad and just, okay, sorry, that happened, but nothing came of it, so it's fine. So
yeah, I don't know that I've ever been a perfect example of that, of unconditional love either, because there's definitely, I've had those moments too. I'm like, really? You have a license? That's great. But even, beyond that, there honestly just, there's stories in the news or people that you hear about that you wonder, why is this person doing this thing? You hear such terrible stories and then you wonder, am I really supposed to love that person? Am I really supposed to have unconditional love for someone who does something like that, to hurt somebody else or steal from somebody else or whatever it is? It's like, that's really hard to accept. I mean, it's really easy to nod my head and say, yeah, we should love unconditionally. But then when it comes down to actually doing it, that's where it's like, oh yeah, now I actually have to show that.
Yeah, we've been dealing with the whole homeschooling aspect of life. And it's amazing how many times we kind of go, I have to love my kids. Because right now I want to eat you alive, because you shouldn't be arguing this much about writing 2 sentences. Like, just write 2 sentences. Why can't you do this? Oh my goodness, I need to walk away. You have to love them. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, I don't like you right now, but I do love you.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm that way with my husband sometimes.
Yeah, there's patience in all relationships, and there's times when you walk away because it's the best thing to do. You can't always win.
I just can't look at you right now.
It reminds me too much of why I'm angry. So some of the words that he used, and actually there are a lot of Greek words for the word love. And I was kind of wondering what each of you might think about the importance of learning ancient Greek words. Do you think it serves to confuse people more, or does it actually help, do you think?
I would say, depending on who's preaching and teaching, that will confuse someone. If the individual like knows everything they know about Greek, but they can't disseminate that down to an understandable level, it's useless. I think there's a lot of high value in understanding the language to an extent. I took it in my undergrad, and it hurt my head to try to learn that every day. But it's been beneficial in preaching and teaching because there's so many different nuances in the language. Like just in the example of what Pastor Dave was talking about with love, the biblical Greek has basically 4 different versions of the word love. You have the agape, which was the main point of yesterday's message of it's just because it's sacrificial. It's loving without the reciprocating. It's because I love you, and that's just it. There, the phileo love, that brotherly love we get Philadelphia from, like I love you that way. There's the eros, that erotic, type love. And when we use love in our language today, like we almost have to be in front of someone and hear what they're saying to understand how they're using it. Whereas when you look at the Greek language, you can't confuse the type of love that they're talking about because it's written so drastically different from every other word. And so like that changes the meaning. How it's written changes the perspective. How it's written, and not just the word, but how it's phrased, goes into a whole different depth. I have found in my own study when it comes to preaching that I don't go through and like try to find every single word, but if I see a particular word in a passage, I'll go look that up and just try to find out like, what's the meaning behind this, and does that have any relevancy to what's going on? We have been going through the I am statements of Jesus. We're going through 7 weeks of it. We're on week 5. And there's passage where Jesus is walking on water. And it's right before he gives another I am statement, which was the whole point of what we were preaching on. But as he's walking on water, he says, hey, it is I, don't be afraid. That it is I, when it's translated out of the Greek, is ego eimi, which is the same phrasing as the I am statement of God from the Exodus story. So what he's saying as he's walking on water is, don't be afraid, I am, which has a whole new depth and power to the passage now. As he's like walking on water, he's like, I'm here, I can control this, don't be afraid. So understanding the language adds to a depth and a whole different layer of things that when we just read it in English is great. It's a hard language to learn for other people, but we speak it, we understand it. But understanding the original language gives so much more context to what's happening. And it can be confusing if the preacher's dumb. That's how it gets confusing.
What do you mean by dumb? Like just doesn't explain it? Yeah.
If they have no idea how to explain the verbiage and why it's so relevant, or if they're just trying to sound smart, leave them go somewhere else.
I've listened to some of those preachers that they just kind of say the word and they're like really excited about knowing the word and saying the word, but then they don't ever explain it and they just kind of move on. You're like, wait, how do you even spell that? I want to look it up later. You're like, if you're not going to explain it, at least give me the word, the letters, so I can find it for myself.
Yeah, they essentially just spoke in tongues without translation. It's great.
Yeah, I didn't even know that Greek was such an important part of it, honestly, since I'm such a baby Christian. But in my studies, there's definitely been times where I've come across a word and I usually just ask Dad how to say it. I don't ever look it up. And then so as I started getting more depth into it, I started looking them up and I realized how important it was. It's not like every other word's in Greek. It's not how it is, but especially some of the names. And I know that the names aren't Greek, but at least not most of them. But Oh my gosh, it is a hard thing. And before now, I always wanted to learn Greek because Greece is the place that I would visit if I only could pick one place to visit. And that was always my thing. So I knew a few words, but not like this. So I think it's important, but I think that Josh makes a good point that if the pastor preaches about it but doesn't teach about it, then some people aren't going to really get it. And like you said, it's good to know how to spell things because we want to look them up later.
Yeah, English is a great and horrible language. It's very dominant, so if you know English, you're set for most of the world. But not many other languages can be translated into English very well because they tend to be much more expressive than we are, and we tend to use as few words as possible to describe a multitude of things. So it makes it really, really difficult. I actually did not know about the whole "it is I" statement. I thought he was just saying, "I'm Jesus." I didn't realize he was saying, "No, I'm also God." Like it's I, Jesus, and God.
Yeah, like I was in that passage going, "Oh my goodness, are you kidding me?"
Yeah, that's a good find.
Yeah. Well, what was that other one that used to talk about the peace on earth and goodwill towards men?
Oh, yeah. So I would have people, I still have people every now and then that would just tell me the King James is the only Bible you need to read. And look, hey, I get it. If you love that translation, read it. Knock yourself out. I'm not going to read it. Like, it's hard.
It is. I did that once. We were reading the Sermon of the Day, and it was in like a King James derivative. Kendra's already laughing. It was like I think it was like ASV or something like that, but it still had a lot of like these and thous in it. And I didn't know that. So she just gave it to me and we were recording it and I just started reading it and I was like, the first line was fine. It was like plain English. And then all of a sudden it was like thine and all this. I was like, uh-oh. But I had to
keep it. Rocked it. He didn't stumble. He didn't do anything until the very end. He's like, well, I think it was ESV. Oh my gosh.
Something
it
like
was
that.
It was hilarious.
I
just gave him my
so
phone
hard.
because we were recording at my kitchen table and I just handed him my phone. And usually I have it in NIV and for some reason it had just reverted somehow. But I'm happy it did because it made us laugh.
The different translations are hard to read. I've preached a couple times using the Hawaiian Pidgin version. And that is just, I do it just to kind of like help people understand, like there's so many different dialects out there. It's hard to get through. I love like the Steeler man is Satan. So, I mean, it's kind of fun to talk like that. And so, but I would say like, with that passage of, peace on earth, goodwill towards men, we see that on Christmas cards and it's from the King James and, there's nothing inherently wrong with the verse, but we have found Greek translations closer to the time of Jesus. And, I tell people if you're cutting wood and you have a template, you use that template the closest to the original that you can to get the most accurate cut. And so we have this translation now that's found closer to the time of Jesus. And what that relates in translation is peace on earth and goodwill to the men that God reveres. So now it brings it a whole different question of, so who does God revere now? We can look at it two ways, that it could still be peace on earth, goodwill towards men, and generally speaking for everyone. Or is he talking more about those that have been saved and those that have followed him? And so it creates two different questions out of that. And it takes more digging into the context of the passage and everything else. So when we find these translations that these scholars are digging into the earth and finding them, we want to find the closest to the actual date of Jesus. It's hard to, at least in my mind, it's hard to argue against that. Like you have some of the 5th century or the 3rd century, which one are you going to choose? I would choose one from the 3rd century because it's closer to the time. But I don't sit back and tell people they're wrong for reading for the King James and reading that and think it's fine, But if I'm going to translate from something, I'm going to try to translate from something that's closer to it and try to have the most accurate transcription available.
Yeah, I mean, they worked on what they had at the time, but since then they've found so much more. And and that's one thing that I never understood about that was people were against progress. Like we found more. Like shouldn't we be encouraging the finding of more accurate things, not just sticking with like, nah, we're good. We figured it out. So actually, here are several different words in Greek for love and what they mean. So there is agape, which is unconditional. There's agapeo, which is love for God. There's agapetos, which is dearly loved and cherished. There is eros, which is romantic, erotic love. There is phileo, love as dear friends. There is philandros, which is love between husband and wife. And then there is philet eknos, which is love for children. So it's like, there's so many different words, so specific, like a word specifically for I love my children.
And
is there one for husband loves cars?
Let's see, horse-drawn carriage. Can't find it. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's interesting to get into the language because of how specific it is. Just in the word "the," there's 24 different ways to say "the," but it's all about the tense of it. Is it present, passive, all that good stuff like that. So I mean, and when you start something, and when you look at it like a Greek manuscript or even a Hebrew manuscript, the tense follows the entire sentence. So you can't change a word because it won't make sense with the entire sentence because the casing of the word. I'm getting too technical. I need to just stop talking. I'm going to become one of those pastors that are like get too advanced and like no one cares. It's just important. That's where we're going to leave that at.
I like it.
Maybe over coffee next time you're in town.
Yeah.
More time to use your hands to express. And
I am a hand talker. Bad.
Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. It's kind of funny. It depends on the topic, and also depends on how animated I am about the topic. So that's a good indicator as well.
Were you with us at Elevate when I had the opportunity to speak at Elevate? And they handed me a handheld microphone, and I have my tablet, and I was like, guys, we're in trouble. I'm a hand talker. I can't do anything with my hands.
I think that sounds familiar, but you might have told me that before.
Oh my gosh,
Don't want to
that
be
must have
waving
been
around.
rough.
Yeah, which one do you risk dropping, the mic or the iPad?
Right.
And you can't move the mic, otherwise I can't hear you.
That's
bad.
That's a good point. That's great. So another thing that David talked about in the sermon, which for those of you who are listening and haven't listened to it, again, we're just going to say this every week, but you need to go hear it. Even if you don't watch the YouTube, listen to it on the podcast, because you might just find yourself cracking up when you're watching all the shenanigans that were going on with the wind on Sunday. But it was very, very good message. What's that?
Did you just
yeah, but if you watch the...
What's that?
Did you just say the YouTube?
If I did, then I'm embarrassed. I hope I did not say the YouTube. I will resign from this podcast.
But if you do watch the video, you might be able to see Lewis get hit in the face with a carpet. So
nice.
It was a good time. It was a good time had by all. But yeah, very, very good sermon. It's called Game of Life, Love Life. So it just kind of goes in through all the different aspects of what love should mean to us as Christians. And so one of the things he talked about was loving ourselves, that if we love God and we acknowledge that God is love, then we should also love ourselves. But sometimes I find that it's difficult. And I wonder, like, why do you think that it's so difficult for us to love ourselves sometimes?
Well, especially when you do something that you know you're not supposed to do. We all do them. We all do things that, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And it's hard to not sit there and thump yourself on the head and say, why did I do that? Why did I do that? And you just wallow in that self-pity.
You know what was fun in Sparks was working with all those students, and every single one of them had a different story. And one of the things that I think was kind of common with them coming to the terms of how to love themselves was having to work through some of the horrible situations they had gone through in their upbringing. And I think that's for a lot of us, it's hard to love ourselves because we live so hard in the past. We have a hard time living just in the now and also like looking forward to the future. We stick ourselves in the past a lot. And I think that's probably what hurts us the most is we have a really hard time letting go. And Jesus, when he forgives us, it sounds way oversimplified, but that whole like Staples easy button a few years back, tap the button, that's done, right? And we have a hard time understanding like it's done. That doesn't make sense to us because we have these ingrained systems in our head of like having to continually like revert or go back to these people and continually ask for forgiveness and keep rehashing things when we just need to take a good long dose of learning how to shut up sometimes and just be okay with it. And when I'm talking to people about these things, like, we never forget our past, and we don't necessarily have to forget our past. When Jesus forgives us, like, we don't just forget. It's not forgive and forget, but we don't have to forgive and dwell. We don't have to stay in that anymore. We're released. And I think we have a hard time understanding what it means to be released.
Makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, I like that. I especially, forgive, but don't dwell. Because, I mean, when someone wrongs you, I don't know that I've ever forgotten it, but I know that I can not think about it. I know that I can let that go and it doesn't have to occupy my brain space anymore. I've forgiven them, so now that's done, but there's still consequences to actions. So, if somebody has wronged me or betrayed my trust, I'm not just going to immediately go trust them again because I forgave them. But it does mean that I'm not going to go around and, spread rumors about them and gossip about them and try and ruin their reputation and everything. I can forgive and say, that's done. What's done is done. Don't do that again. But also now I can move on with my life and not continue.
Yeah, but what if what they did to you was such a blow to your self-love that it's hard to not move past that. I mean, eventually we all do, but for example, say a spouse cheats on a spouse. The cheater has made the poor innocent spouse feel unworthy and unloved and unbeautiful and whatever. And so how do we do that? Because it's easy to forgive and not dwell, but when something like that happens, that shatters your self-love, where that person that you love and said that they love you did this to you and made you feel like garbage.
I would say that comes with time. I'd say that sometimes when a situation that bad takes place, when you just so desperately want love to win and the other person just doesn't care and they are willing to harm you and willing to take away the love from the relationship by selfishly acting, yes, you can still forgive them, but getting to a point where you're no longer dwelling on it sometimes takes separation. It sometimes takes permanent separation, and sometimes it takes temporary separation. It depends on what happened, and everyone's different. And if the cheater's remorseful, maybe the reconciliation can happen. I've heard of that.
I think we have to understand too that a couple things, like, we have a very microwave culture where we want things done right away, and forgiving doesn't mean that you just heal right away either. You can forgive and still work through the process, and in that process is, I think, what gets a lot of people hung up, because, well, I've forgiven them, but I still hurt. And it's like, you can forgive and still hurt, but it takes time, like Stephen was saying, and it takes a discipline of leaning on the love of Jesus to recognize that you're hurt and know that his love conquers the hurt that we've gone through. And that sounds very churchy cheesy to say in a sense, but there's truth in that. Like, we struggle to express love and forgiveness naturally. We just do. And we have to learn that by, like, when we say, like, lean into things, and we say lean into scripture and, like, dig into that, like, it's because when we put more of our time and effort, I think David was getting into that yesterday, like, you get out of it what you put into it, not because you earn things, but like in any relationship you have, especially like in a marriage relationship, you shouldn't be like in a situation where, like, you're going to do something for a spouse to get something back. You do something because you love them and you're You're there for them. And the more you invest into that relationship, the happier your marriage is going to be. Not because like it's this give and take thing. It's because you love them. And so the more we dig into Jesus, the more we love into that, the more we're going to find these moments of healing from scripture, from other people in the church who there are a ton of people in the church that are like counselors and, what is it? Psychologists and psychiatrists, like there are followers of Jesus in this field that are going to we're going to be run into in the course of time, or find people who have gone through these things, and healing comes through the church in conjunction with God and God's word. And the more we dig into those things in that time, in that process, I think is pretty huge.
Right. Well, it also disclaimer, not personal. It was just the first thing that came to mind, just so before anybody thinks that I'm insinuating anything. But it also feeds into the fact that Jesus's love comes first. And I think that it's important to remember that, and that'll help with the self-love aspect of it, because imagine loving somebody so unconditionally that every time they did something wrong, it was fine because they, for lack of a better word, because they repent. So, and they also follow. And so just imagine what that's like. So that love should definitely come first over any love, I think. So having Jesus's love in a roundabout way is having self-love.
I like that. Yeah. And even going back to the self-love, regardless of another individual, like if you just have a hard time loving yourself, not because of what someone did to you, but just because maybe you're super depressed and you don't like how you look, you don't like how you act, you don't like your accomplishments, you think that you're not as good as you can be, whatever it is. If there's a reason why you're struggling just personally, I think also it is a loss of remembering the first love, right? Remembering why Jesus loves us, because he doesn't care. He doesn't care whether you have 0 accomplishments or 1,000. He loves you the same. And it
he
should
also doesn't
encourage
care
us.
if you have cellulite, ladies.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Well, and I think it's also a big part of that is too, like understanding our identity.
Yeah.
I've had a number of times talking with people and just kind of reminding them, when we introduce ourselves, we typically say, hey, my name is Joe and I do this.
Yeah.
And they interject what they do for a living. And typically the first things that we say about ourselves is how we see ourselves. And so I don't do it myself yet. I'm wondering if I can still get around to do it, because it sounds kind of weird, but I've thrown it out there. If you introduce yourself and you're a follower of Jesus, start by saying hi, my name is Kendra. Hi, my name is Kendra. I'm a joyful follower of Jesus, and I get to do this, and this with my life. And that lets them know right away, your identity is wrapped in that first. And it almost sounds like self-willing that to happen, but it's just that constant reminder of who you are, who you belong to. Now, I belong to God first, and I'm a son or a daughter of God. Even when we struggle and we have those moments where we don't feel like it, sometimes just saying that little mantra type thing of I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, or I'm a son and daughter of God, or something to that effect, that can help in those moments. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there's a video by the Skit guys called God's Chisel that has gotten pretty popular for that very reason, because it starts off with one guy just feeling really horrible about himself and, what's the point of me? And the other guy playing the role of God saying, it's not about anything you've done. I have always been there for you, and I'm always your champion, and you don't ever have to measure up. And I think about that a lot. And then there's also, to your point, Josh, about how you introduce yourself, there's this writer named Robert Fulghum, and he wrote a book called It Was on Fire When I Lay Down on It. It's a very interesting book. But he, in that book, he talks about how he made business cards, but on the business cards, he just put his name. And it just says his name in the middle on one side, and the other side is just blank. So when people ask him, hey, what do you do? Who are you? And he just gives them the card. And so they're expecting there's a logo or something on the back, and they flip it over, and it's just blank. It's just his name. And sometimes they ask, wait, what? Who are you? And he's like, this is me. Get to know me. I'm not someone that's just on a card. Get to know me. I'm more than what a card could ever say.
That's also an indication that something bad's about to happen in a Martin Scorsese movie.
That you get handed a blank card.
Oh my God.
So the whole title of that book actually comes from a story of a person who called the fire department because their bed was on fire, and it subsequently caught the room on fire. And when the fire department came and got the person out, and like, what were you doing laying in a bed that was on fire? And that was their response was, it was on fire when I lay down on it. Just like very confused.
That doesn't answer the question.
It really doesn't, but very, very confused firemen, I'm sure, that day.
Oh, that's a story they still tell.
Yeah. What's the craziest thing someone ever said to you? So one of the last things that I was looking at through all this was, especially in verse 18, the writer talks about like love over fear. And there were a lot of times I learned as a kid that yes, God loves, but there was also a healthy dose of fear, especially in the Old Testament that they had, because they knew God is God and he can destroy. And if he chooses to wipe out humanity, he could. And so it was always this idea that it was more than just reverence. It was more than just, I respect God, but it was an actual, God is huge and God spoke everything into being. And it is the ultimate, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. Parents can say that, but God is the one who can really, really do that without a second thought. So I kind of wondered how we reconcile the two between where there is love, there is no fear, because God's love is perfect love. And those who fear are afraid of punishment. So is fear of God because we're just afraid he's going to punish us? Or is there a way to have a healthy level of fear and still recognize the perfect love of God?
I've been sitting on this one all day. And can I say thank you, Stephen, for such a wonderful question.
Spoiler alert, I sent these ahead of time. Now the audience knows you've shattered the illusion.
Oh, I didn't know it. No one will know.
Yeah, until now we were an improv.
Sorry.
Broke the fourth wall. It's all good.
We did a thing, the Who is God study with Francis Chan, and he really hit on that pretty hard of the Isaiah 6 passage where Isaiah like basically is standing before God and like he's in this like in the temple and it's like just the robes of God like encompass the room. And it's like, what? and he's very afraid. And Francis Chan points out that like this isn't the like, oh, I respect God fear. He's like, no, I'm going to die moment. Mm-hmm. And it was just that. And then in that moment of that fear, like I think there's also this moment of worship where he's standing before God and he doesn't just run. Isaiah doesn't run from it. And I think that was pretty critical in that passage. Like Isaiah doesn't run away from it. He stays there and he hears this question of like, who am I going to send? And is God asking? And in this fear of seeing the reality of God, there's also like this, yeah, this is who I'm going to follow. I think sometimes like we don't like looking at fear as part of worship, but I think there's a part of that in there because worship is every single part of who we are. So every emotion, everything we can think of, every time we act or say something, if we're a follower of Jesus, it should be worship. So in the moments where we fear, that's also maybe a part of worship too, where this is understanding of who we really serve. But again, almost like the disciples on the boat, like they started getting a little freaked out because the waves are coming and here comes Jesus and he goes, hey, don't be afraid. It is I, the ego eimi, I am. You don't have to fear see me walk on water. You don't have to fear these waves. It's me. And maybe that was the same kind of notion in Isaiah. I don't know, but I think just hearing God's voice kind of like casts away that fear. Yeah, you're standing before me. Don't worry.
So it's kind of like that perfect understanding of it's good that we understand the necessity to fear, but then it's God who can tell us no need to fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense? It's not on us to decide, you know what, I don't need to fear. It's not like a macho thing that we just get over being afraid of God. It's like that God releases us from that fear.
And almost in a sense, maybe having that permission. Like the only thing I can think of, and I've been thinking throughout the day, and it sounds horrible, but like if we were to walk up to the White House and our president walks out, and we would by almost requirement of just respecting the office, say Mr. President, or you know what I mean, like we would address him that way, and we would address the president regardless of who the president is, like with Mr. President, until they say, hey, you know what, just call me Donald. Like then there's like, oh, okay, well, hey Donald, or you know, whoever,
Mr. Trump.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like, and we almost have that. When we approach God, we're like, God, you are all powerful. You are incredible. I can't even stand here. And he goes, hey, do you want to do the work I need you to do? Because it would be really great. Like, let's do this. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, yeah, let's do this.
I got so much on my plate right now. Can you please take this off my hands?
I got these awful false prophets bothering me day and night, poisoning people against my word.
Never mind.
That's awesome. No, I like that. I think that fits really well. But yeah, you're welcome for that question. It's funny. I told Josh that I don't have anything really deep. It's just kind of whatever. I sent him that.
And I was, bazinga.
Like, hey, thanks, dude. Not sure if you consider it deep anymore, but
no, it was just, that was actually the one when I reread it, I was like, oh boy, that's actually quite a bit of a doozy. I don't even know if I have an answer for that.
So when we are talking about like the fear of God and responding in love, and how do we reconcile that? I think we have also like a practical thing on our side where, especially dealing with like COVID-19 stuff, I've been trying to caution people of being too cautious of being too cautious. And that sounds almost like I'm trying to tell people like not to care about things, and that's not what I'm telling them. I'm more concerned that we as a church don't become the priests and the Levites of the Good Samaritan story, where because someone might have a virus, we're going to walk past them even though they might need help. We had an individual, him and his girlfriend came to the church, and they started off with like they just wanted someone to pray with them, and I was like, well, okay. And I met him outside because it was a nice day, and we started 6 feet apart. But as they kept sharing their story, it became very apparent that the story was very real. He was on the phone with a lawyer trying to fight a custody battle to get one of his kids back. Him and his girlfriend had been dealing with struggles with meth addictions, and 5 years ago this guy was a pastor, and like all these different little things kind of kept going and going and going. And he's like we just need a little bit of food, so I gave him some gift cards to McDonald's, and he's like, can we just pray? And I was like, sure. And by this time we're within a normal distance apart, like 2-3 feet, just talking like we normally would. And we start praying, and as we get done praying, this guy's crying. And when you see something happen almost in slow-mo, but you can't do anything about it but just go with it, this literally, like, this is what happened. Like we got done praying, we said amen, and he wiped this tear off of his eye, and he reached out to shake my hand and say thank you. And my response wasn't, oh my gosh, there's coronavirus, don't touch me. No, I shook his hand, right? I shook his hand because he needed that moment. And, I became aware of my hand. I didn't like try to touch my face or put my hands in my pocket, but it was just, we can't disregard people for fear, because the perfect love of God will cast out fear, and God will guide you in these moments that you're going to encounter, especially in what we're living in right now, to overcome fear and live in faith. And we need to be attentive to the prompting of the Spirit in that. Otherwise, we will become very much like the priests and the Levites, who, if you look at an elementary school exam, what's the best answer for this question? Like, yeah, the priest was doing his priestly duties. That's a good answer. But the best answer was to help the guy on the road, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
So like, I'm going to go do a good thing. Well, great, go do a good thing. But the best thing to do is stop and help someone, because we're called to be relational.
I think it's happened throughout, not just even pandemics in the past. Like, obviously there was the 1918, but I mean, there was also throughout all of history. Whenever there was a pandemic hitting, there were people just afraid of each other. And sometimes it's smart to be cautious. But when we let fear override our duty, I don't want to say duty to love, but I guess more of like compulsion, because we want to love. Like as we grow closer to God, we want to love people. But if we act like Peter and we see all the wind and the waves, then we stop loving, because we're now focusing on the fear instead of him and his example. So I think that's it's important to remember for every generation. It seems like we like to think of ourselves as so much better than the people in the past because we have the burden of knowledge. You know, we have all this Bible knowledge. We have all these Christian living books. We've had all these great preachers who are famous and give these amazing speeches and sermons. And so we think we're so much more advanced. But in reality, stuff like this kind of just shows, no, we're still struggling with the same everyday thing, to just stop being afraid of people who are different than you, or stop being afraid of people because someone told you to be afraid of people.
I've always been afraid of people, so I fit right in right now. Not afraid, but it did take me a long time to not immediately jump to conclusions based, like, don't judge a book by its cover type thing. So it did take me a long time to not do that. There are still some people that I see on the street, and I'll cross the street to avoid, of course, because I'm a woman and I worry. And I'm also tiny.
I've got double pepper spray. Don't even try it.
Yeah. Well, it's also Reno, and we can conceal carry with a permit. So.
Oh, there you go.
Anyway, so it took me a long time to do that. And I actually had a really big argument with my cousin about this when at my dad's ordination. Actually, we were at this little cafe in Auburn, and it was the cutest little cafe. I'll never forget it. I want to go every time I'm there. But anyway, besides the point, my cousin is this big, burly 6-foot guy. He could play Jason Voorhees. Like, he's just, and he made a comment about this person, and I was just like, why did you say that? And he said, you know, I just automatically assume that people are not trustworthy. So he meets new people and just assumes that they're going to screw him over or lie to him or steal from him or do things. And I got pretty heated about it. Even his dad had to step in and tell him to shut up because I was getting upset. Because even though there are times where I do judge books by its cover, I'm never unkind. And, you know, I'll keep my distance. And I did that even before coronavirus. But because I have a bubble, but it's just, it took a lot for me to even get to the point where I was having that argument with him, because I used to be like that. And when my dad was getting ordained, I wasn't going to church. I wasn't even considering going to church at that point in time. So just the fact that weekend that I had with the district completely changed the way I looked at people. And so it's just, I think it's important to never just judge right away. And your story, Josh, is inspiration for that. Even if you did know him before his addiction, you know, so you knew him, all that. But, you know, you see in Reno, you see a meth head and you don't at all want to interact with them or touch them in any way.
Right. I remember those days.
Yeah.
Well, that was, so it's a really great sermon. So definitely go check that out if you haven't, or maybe listen again, because maybe you missed something. There's a lot to unpack in it. And, you know, I think there's probably even more topics that if I really wanted to, I could go back through and pick more out. And then we'd be talking for a whole nother hour. But I don't know how many of you would even listen to that. So we are going to go ahead and say thank you to Josh for coming on. And we are going to just kind of end this. Is there any other final thoughts that either of you, Kendra or Josh, have before we say goodbye to everybody?
No, but read Proverbs 1 verse 7. That's what I have to say. Do it, or I'll read it to you right now. So your last question, you know, how do we turn to scripture to work through the fear of God thing? Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction."
Perfect.
So just think about it.
Don't
And
be a fool.
Stephen, don't be a fool. Don't be a fool. Because if you fear knowledge and wisdom, then you fear God. That's basically what that's saying. That's not all it's saying, but in a nutshell. So at least to me, that's how I interpreted it. And so that really helps me with the whole fear of God thing.
That's cool. I like that. Good find. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. And we will see you all next week.
Yeah. And thanks, Josh, for joining us all the way from sunny Arizona.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me come be a part of this, and hope it all makes sense and you guys have fun with it.
No, yeah, I'm sure it'll be just fine, especially with your awesome input. All right. Prayers and love, everybody.